Daniel Camargo Barbosa is a Colombian serial killer who is responsible for the murder of 72 young girls in Columbia and Ecuador, which is the equivalent of 3 per month over his 2-year crime spree. Background: Daniel Camargo Barbosa was born on January 22nd, 1930 in Analima, Colombia. During his important, formative early years, his mother died and his stepfather was said to be tyrannical, and he was also emotionally distant from Daniel. To add to his issues, his stepmother was abusive and used to dress him up in girls' clothing, much to the ridicule and entertainment of his siblings and friends. There isn't much else that we know about Daniel's life up until his killings, probably due to the time period and the lack of general documentation that happened about people's day-to-day lives. What we do know about Daniel is that he had 2 children with a woman named Alcira, or Alcira, I'm not sure, I will leave the spelling on the screen. The pair were also in a de facto union, which is basically a more relaxed version of marriage. Daniel soon became bored of his married life and fell in love with 28-year-old Esperanza. He even wanted to leave his family behind and marry her, but there was one issue: she wasn't a virgin. This fact bothered Daniel even more and led him to becoming obsessed with the concept behind women's virginity. In return for staying with her, Esperanza, Daniel had a condition. The condition was that she was to help him find virgin girls that he could have sex with. Now, surprisingly, Esperanza agreed to this, and the pair set out on a tirade of evil and vicious crimes. Esperanza would lure young girls into the pair's apartment under the promise of sweets, food, and sometimes even alcohol. Once inside the apartment, the girls would be drugged with sleeping tablets, and Daniel would rape them. Daniel claims that he didn't kill any of the 5 victims that he caught using this method. The 5th victim actually reported the attack to the police, which led to the arrest of Esperanza and Daniel. Daniel was charged with sexual assault and sent to prison on April 10, 1964. It is unclear what sentence, if any, Esperanza was given for her involvement in the crimes. For his crimes, Daniel was given a 3-year sentence by the judge, something that at first he was extremely grateful for and promised that he would become a changed man. However, a new judge was assigned to the case during his sentencing, and the new judge gave him 8 years instead of 3, which sent him into a seething rage. Just under 10 years later, in 1973, Daniel was sent to prison in Brazil for being an undocumented immigrant. He was actually released and deported due to delays in getting his case to trial. When he was deported, however, it was done so using the fake documentation that he got into Brazil with. So, nonetheless, Daniel returned home to his native Colombia, a free man, and allowed to wander the streets he once terrorized. He took up odd jobs to earn a living and even ended up as a TV seller in Barranquilla, Colombia. As Daniel was passing by a school one day, he kidnapped a 9-year-old girl. He took her back to his apartment where he raped and killed her. Daniel would go on to tell the police that he killed the girl because he didn't want her to report him like his previous victims had done. This is the first instance of escalation that we will see in Daniel Camargo Barbosa. Subsequently, Daniel was arrested on May 3, 1974 in Barranquilla, Colombia, after he was found revisiting the crime scene of his first murder victim. Daniel is actually believed to have been responsible for the rape and murder of over 72 girls in Colombia. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 30 years, which sadly was reduced to 25. He served his time on the prison island of Goronga, Colombia, which is known as the Columbian Alcatraz. However, due to some delays that we aren't sure of, or at least I couldn't find, Daniel wasn't sent there until December of 1997. By 1984, Daniel had decided that he had had enough of prison life, and in November of that year, so 1984, he escaped Garanga, using a handmade boat from anything that he could get his hands on. Over the 7 years that he lived on the prison island, he studied the ocean currents so that he could get away safely. It's safe to say that Daniel was a smart criminal. Prison guards and local authorities assumed that Daniel had just died at sea and succumbed to the dangerous and rocky currents of the surrounding waters. The press, however, went with the story that Daniel had been eaten by sharks during his escape. Both of these versions of events were untrue, and Daniel made his way to Quito, Ecuador, by December 5th or 6th, where he then boarded a bus to Guayaquil. It wasn't long until he succumbed to his evil urges, and by December 18th, he had already abducted a 9-year-old girl, with a 10-year-old girl going missing the next day. Between 1984 and 1986, it is believed that Daniel is responsible for at least 54 rapes and murders of young girls in Guayaquil, Ecuador. Police were at first confused and linked the string of crimes to gang activity, as they couldn't comprehend that just one person was able to carry out so many attacks. Ecuadorian authorities couldn't have been more wrong. Most countries don't communicate or share information regarding released or escaped prisoners, so if he had actually been caught, it's unlikely that his past record from Columbia would have even appeared. Daniel's victimology was young, lower-class girls who were often searching for work to help provide for their families. He would lure them in, pretending to be from out of town and in need of help. His most popular ruse was that he needed a pastor in a church that was located in a remote part of the town. He explained to the girls that he needed this specific church as he was delivering a large sum of money, and he offered the girls money as a reward if they helped him get to his destination. He would also hint that they might be able to get a job at the local factory since he was carrying such a large sum of money, and he had connections. Whilst on their journey, Camargo would lead them into the woods, claiming to be looking for a shortcut, so he could get his job done faster. This was also done to alleviate the suspicion of his victims. Once in the woods, Camargo would grab the girls and rape them before strangling them to death. Daniel would also stab the girls if they tried to fight against him, heightening his killing pleasure. Once the girls were dead, he would just leave them there, like trash, to be eaten by wild animals or consumed by maggots and flies. Daniel's game was finally over on February 26, 1986, when he was arrested for the murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth. He was arrested after he was seen near the crime scene acting suspiciously, and police were very right to be wary of him. When police searched Daniel, they found a bag that he was carrying containing bloody clothes and the clitoris of 9-year-old Elizabeth, along with a copy of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. He was quickly apprehended and taken to the police station. Upon his arrival, Daniel gave the police a fake name, hoping that in the future this might help him. The name he gave was Manuel Bulgarin Solis. Luckily, one of his escape victims was able to identify him and alerted police to Daniel's true identity. After some time, Camargo confessed to killing over 72 girls in Ecuador since he escaped from prison in Columbia in 1984. So that means that within a 2-year period, Daniel killed 36 girls per year, which breaks down to around 3 per month. Daniel knew his game was up and cooperated with police, leading them to many different crime scenes, some of which hadn't even been discovered yet. He also smugly told them about the sadistic and brutal natures of his crimes and that he had no remorse and didn't feel bad about any of them. He also told police that he had raped his victims, he would hack slash, and crush them with a machete, and that he chose children because he wanted virgins because they cried, and that gave him the greatest sexual pleasure of all. His main motivation was that he was seeking revenge for women being unfaithful, although it isn't known exactly what relationship or point in his life triggered this association with women being unfaithful. In his own words, he hated them for not being what he believed women were supposed to be. For his crimes, Daniel was only sentenced to 16 years in prison, which is the maximum term that you can serve in Ecuador. He was sentenced in 1989 and was actually held in the same prison as Pedro Alonso Lopez, who is known as the Monster of the Andes. Lopez is apparently responsible for the rape and murder of over 300 girls in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, which puts those two up there as some of the most prolific serial rapists and murderers and child killers that South America has ever seen. Karma finally made its way to Daniel on November 13th, 1994, when he was stabbed to death by Giovanni Nogueira. Nogueira was actually the nephew of one of Daniel's victims, and he stated that he had acted in revenge. Daniel was 64 years old when he died, and just 5 years into his prison sentence. So, a huge thank you for tuning in to another video. If you follow me on social media, you might have seen that I've announced sort of a new series coming to the channel. I'm going to be uploading a video explaining how that's all going to work, and you can leave any case suggestions down there. As always, all of my social media is linked down below. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They're all just at True Crime Witch. There's a Google Docs form in the description box if you want to recommend a case, if there's a case that is near and dear to your heart, that you want to see me cover, or that you're just interested in. Just fill in the form and I'll get round to it. There's also a link to my Patreon. If you feel generous enough, then thank you. I can't, overstate how much I appreciate that, but even if you just watch and like and subscribe my videos and, follow me on social media, then that's more than I ever dreamed of, so thank you. And remember, stay safe and stay spooky.